Welcome to The Explainer. Today we're going to unpack a really strange and dramatic story from the prophet Ezekiel. It's a tale of some bizarre street theater, dangerous misinformation, and what happens when a whole society decides they'd rather have a comforting lie than a very uncomfortable truth.
Okay, let's just dive right in. Our story kicks off with the prophet Ezekiel. He's in exile, living in Babylon, and he gets this command from God to, go perform some seriously bizarre public theater.
I mean, can you imagine seeing this? A respected religious figure suddenly starts acting out this desperate escape from his own house. You'd think, has he lost his mind? But no, this isn't madness. It's actually prophetic street theater, and it's designed to grab the attention of an audience that has completely tuned out.
God gives him this three-step performance. So, step 1, during the day, he has to pack a bag with just the bare essentials, like he's being forced to leave. Then, as evening comes, he has to literally start digging a hole through the clay brick wall of his own house with his bare hands. Finally, at dusk, with everyone watching, he has to crawl through that hole, throw his bag on his shoulder, and cover his face like he's some kind of fugitive escaping in the dead of night. Now, every single part of this act was a living, breathing prophecy. It wasn't just some general, vague warning of doom and gloom. Nope, it was a very specific prediction about what was going to happen to the ruler back in Jerusalem, King Zedekiah.
And what's really fascinating here is how Ezekiel literally becomes the message. His body is the billboard. That whole escape act, it directly foretells the king's own failed attempt to flee at night and the fact that he'll eventually be blinded. But then there's a second act. He's also told to eat and drink with this visible anxiety, quaking and trembling, to show the sheer terror that was going to grip the people when Jerusalem was under siege.
So you gotta ask, right? Why all the drama? Why go to such extreme lengths? Because the people, both the exiles and the ones back home in Jerusalem, had become totally numb to his warnings. They were basically suffering from prophecy fatigue.
This was the popular saying making the rounds. It was their ancient way of saying, yeah, whatever. We've heard all this doom and gloom before, but look, nothing ever happens. They were just dismissing all of Ezekiel's warnings as empty threats.
Well, God's response through Ezekiel is swift and it is direct. He says that proverb, it ends now. He makes it crystal clear that this judgment isn't for some distant future generation. No, it's going to happen in their days to the very people hearing him speak. It is right around the corner. But here's the thing. This dangerous complacency, this cynicism, it didn't just pop up out of nowhere. The crucial point is that it was being actively fed by a source of religious misinformation. False prophets who are out there selling a much more appealing message.
God calls these prophets foolish, using the Hebrew word nabal. And this word means so much more than just unintelligent. It describes someone who is arrogant, morally dull, spiritually inept. They're just following their own spirit, making things up because, as the text says, they have seen nothing from God.
And what was their big message? What were they selling? One simple word: peace. They were peddling false security, telling everyone that everything was going to be just fine, which was the exact opposite of Ezekiel's warnings about the disaster that was coming. And this leads us to the central metaphor for this whole conflict, and it's brilliant. The people were basically building this flimsy, unstable wall of false hope. And what did the false prophets do? They came along and just smeared it with whitewash, a thin coat of paint to make a weak, crumbling structure look strong and secure. It was a lie, pure and simple, designed to look good on the surface. So as you can imagine, this all builds to a direct and fiery confrontation. And God doesn't just call out the male prophets, he also confronts a group of female prophets, or maybe a better word would be sorceresses.
The text describes these women using what sound a lot like instruments of black magic. They're sewing magic bands for people's wrists and creating these special veils. And they're using these things to hunt souls, basically to control people. And they're doing it for a price, for handfuls of barley and bits of bread, all while lying to good people and encouraging the wicked. God's verdict on all of these false prophets, both the men and the women, is absolute. He declares point blank, I am against you. He promises to tear away their magic bands and veils, to free the people they've trapped, and to make sure that they have no part in Israel's future. Their influence is going to be completely destroyed.
So, okay, that was a pretty wild ride. A dramatic, ancient story filled with strange rituals and some really harsh judgments. But the core conflict here, this battle between a hard truth and a comfortable lie, that is absolutely timeless. Why should we care about this today? because it's a powerful, powerful warning about leaders who claim to speak for God but are actually just driven by their own self-interest, whether it's for security, money, or influence. They tell people what they want to hear, not what they need to hear.
Really, the key takeaway from all these is a lesson in discernment. This story shows us that just because someone uses religious language, just because they claim to have spiritual authority, that doesn't automatically mean they're speaking the truth. It doesn't mean their message is from God.
And all of that leaves us with a final, pretty provocative thought. The false prophets in Ezekiel's day, they offered this message of peace, peace, when there was no peace. It was a whitewashed wall. So the question for us is, what popular comforting messages today might just be covering up a really weak or even a dangerous foundation?